The chandeliers of La Couronne, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, spilled golden light across tables dressed in crystal and silver. Conversations drifted like perfume, measured and delicate, until the heavy door opened. Richard Montgomery, billionaire investor and owner of Montgomery Holdings, entered with a small figure clinging to his arm. His son, Lucas, just 10 years old, walked stiffly with the aid of gleaming metal braces. The accident 2 years earlier had robbed him of fluid steps, but not of a boy's longing to belong. A hush traveled through the dining hall. Whispers rose, then quieted as Richard guided his son to their reserved corner table. The maitre d', nervous under the billionaire's cold gaze, snapped his fingers toward a waitress. Diana Johnson, one of the few black employees at La Couronne, tightened her apron and stepped forward. She had worked the floor for 5 years, invisible among pearls and cufflinks, her movements graceful and silent. Tonight would be no different, or so she thought. Lucas's eyes, restless and uncertain, caught sight of the grand piano near the bar. A soft waltz had just begun, notes spilling like liquid silver. His fingers twitched as if remembering nights when his late mother twirled him around their living room. His gaze shifted back to Diana. For the first time in 2 years, he lifted a trembling hand towards someone, not family. "Would you dance with me?" His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried, sharp and clear, slicing through the restaurant's hush. Cutlery froze in midair. A dozen tables turned. The manager, Thornton, stiffened where he stood. "Sir, control your son," he barked, his voice echoing louder than intended. "This is not a dance hall. Our staff are not here to entertain." Richard's jaw clenched. It was the first public dinner he had dared to attempt since Lucas's accident. Already regret gnawed at him. His instinct was to protect, to shield his son from ridicule. "Lucas, sit down." His voice was low, firm, meant to end the moment. But Diana remained where she was, staring at the boy's outstretched hand. The memory of countless nights closing shifts, overhearing snippets of patrons' cruelty, hardened inside her. She untied her apron, set it on the tray, and straightened her back. "I can't dance in an apron," she said evenly, her voice carrying a strength she hadn't expected to reveal. Gasps rippled across the room. Thornton's face burned crimson. "Diana, one more word and you're finished." Richard rose sharply, his chair scraping against marble. "What do you think you're doing?" Diana looked directly at him, unflinching. "Accepting an invitation, sir." And with that, she placed her hand gently into Lucas's. The boy's legs wavered, braces screeching as metal scraped tile. His first step dragged painfully. A murmur ran through the dining hall. Pity, disdain, curiosity. Diana didn't guide him, didn't correct him. She simply matched his halting rhythm. One step, another. 3 beats into the waltz, Lucas was leading. "Reckless," someone hissed. "She'll be fired tomorrow," whispered another. Richard stood frozen, heart hammering. He saw not Diana and Lucas, but Elizabeth, his late wife, whirling their son in the living room. Her laughter had filled the space. "It's not about perfection," she'd said once. "It's about connection." The restaurant seemed suspended in glass. Thornton's voice finally broke it. "Mr. Montgomery, I assure you, she will be disciplined immediately. This will never happen again." Richard did not answer. He couldn't. Lucas's shy, radiant smile was louder than any threat. 3 faltering steps later, Diana curtsied lightly and returned Lucas to his seat. "Thank you for asking me," she said, her tone formal, almost ceremonial. She turned to leave. "Wait," Richard said. His voice cracked. Different, almost unrecognizable. He drew a business card from his jacket. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." Richard repeated it under his breath, as if engraving it into memory. Then he held out the card. "My office." The room buzzed again. Confusion, awe, judgment. But Richard saw only his son's eyes shimmering with something he thought was gone forever. Pride. The card felt heavy in Diana's hand, far heavier than its slim weight of embossed cardstock suggested. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before slipping it into her pocket, acutely aware of dozens of eyes still glued to her back. Thornton stormed across the polished floor, his shoes clicking like gunfire. "You're finished here, Diana," he hissed, low enough not to carry but sharp enough to sting. "Pack your things after this shift." She met his glare calmly. "I already did," she said, nodding toward the apron she'd left behind. For the first time in years, her voice carried no fear. Across the room, Richard returned to his seat, forcing composure into every movement. He picked up his glass of Bordeaux but found his hand trembling slightly. He covered it by taking a slow sip, staring into the deep red liquid as if it could anchor him. Lucas beamed, his cheeks flushed with effort and triumph, his small chest rising and falling quickly. "Dad," he whispered, "did you see? I was leading." The words pierced through Richard like a blade wrapped in silk. 2 years of therapy sessions, tutors, whispered encouragements, all met with silence or resistance. Tonight, with a stranger's hand, his son had found his voice again. "Yes, son," Richard said quietly, "I saw." The rest of the dinner was a blur. Richard barely tasted the roasted duck, barely heard the waiter listing vintages. Every so often, his gaze drifted to where Diana continued her shift as if nothing had happened. Her movements were still precise, efficient, graceful, yet no longer invisible. By the time dessert arrived, Richard's mind was made up. He signed the bill without checking the total, gathered Lucas, and stood. The room seemed to exhale as he passed, diners pretending to return to their conversations, but stealing glances. Outside, the winter air slapped his face awake. A limousine waited at the curb, its driver leaping to open the door. Richard helped Lucas inside, then paused, turning back to the glow of La Couronne. Through the glass, he caught one last glimpse of Diana clearing plates, her shoulders squared despite the storm gathering around her. The following morning, Diana stood in the cramped kitchen of her apartment in Harlem, staring at the business card on the counter. Richard Montgomery, Chairman, Montgomery Holdings. The name meant little to her beyond last night's spectacle. She had no illusions. Billionaires didn't change because of 3 clumsy dance steps. Still, the memory of Lucas's small hand tugging at hers, the way his eyes lit with fragile confidence, it stayed with her. She remembered her younger brother Samuel, paralyzed after a fall years ago, how he'd struggled for a shred of dignity. She had vowed then never to ignore someone reaching out for help. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. She almost ignored it, but curiosity won. "Ms. Johnson?" The voice was smooth, commanding. She recognized it instantly. "Yes, this is Diana. This is Richard Montgomery. I trust I'm not calling too early?" She blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "It's fine, sir. I would like to see you in my office. Today, if possible." His tone left little room for negotiation. "Bring the card I gave you. My assistant will expect you at 10. Before she could ask why, the line clicked dead. Diana exhaled slowly, staring again at the card on her counter. Behind her, the kettle began to whistle. She switched it off, her reflection flickering in the tiny window above the sink. The same face she had seen for 30 years looked back, but today something was different. She straightened, pulled her best jacket from the closet, and tucked the card into her pocket. Whatever awaited at Montgomery Holdings, she knew one thing. She would walk through those doors not as a waitress, but as Diana Johnson. The headquarters of Montgomery Holdings towered over Midtown Manhattan like a monument of steel and glass. Its lobby gleamed with marble floors, golden accents, and a constant stream of suited professionals moving with purpose. Diana hesitated at the revolving doors. She felt out of place in her best jacket, which still bore the faint scent of last night's restaurant shift. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and stepped inside. The receptionist's eyes flickered over her before landing on the card she placed on the counter. Instantly, her demeanor shifted. "Ms. Johnson, Mr. Montgomery is expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 40th floor." Diana clutched her bag tighter as the elevator hummed upward. With each passing floor, her doubts grew louder. Why me? Why call me here? Was it just to scold me in private? To settle scores away from public eyes? When the doors opened, an assistant in a sharp gray suit greeted her with a polite nod. "This way, please." They led her down a hushed corridor lined with portraits of past Montgomery patriarchs. Men in tailored suits, their gazes stern, each radiating power. Diana felt every step echo against marble as if testing her resolve. The office door swung open. Richard Montgomery stood by the window, back turned, staring at the skyline. His son, Lucas, sat in a chair nearby, metal braces glinting faintly in the sunlight. "Miss Johnson," Richard said without turning, "please sit." Diana lowered herself into a leather chair opposite his massive oak desk. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Richard finally turned, his eyes unreadable. "Do you know what happened last night?" Diana held his gaze. "I danced with your son, sir. 3 steps, that's all." Lucas's face brightened. Not just steps, Dad. I led. Silence filled the office. Richard's jaw tightened. Then he exhaled, tension slipping just slightly from his frame. He sat behind the desk, folding his hands. You defied my orders, Miss Johnson. And yet, he paused, glancing at his son. You also gave him something I could not. Diana said nothing, waiting. Richard leaned forward. Lucas hasn't taken initiative since the accident. Therapists, tutors, specialists, they all failed. Yet with you in a room full of judgment, he led. Tell me why. Her answer was simple. Because I didn't see his weakness, sir. I saw his will. The room stilled again. Lucas looked at her with wide eyes, as though hearing his own heart reflected in her words. Richard tapped a finger against the desk, lost in thought. Finally, he said, I want to offer you a position, not as a waitress, as a companion and guide for Lucas. Someone who can help him step forward, literally and figuratively. Diana blinked. Sir, with respect, I'm not a therapist. Not just anything, Richard cut in, his voice firm. You reached him when no one else could. That is worth more than credentials. Lucas tugged at his father's sleeve. Please, Dad, I want her to stay. Diana's throat tightened. The offer was tempting but dangerous. To step into the life of a billionaire meant stepping into scrutiny, expectation, and a world far from her own. She straightened in her seat. I'll consider it, she said carefully. But if I do this, it will be for Lucas, not for you, not for your reputation. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then unexpectedly, Richard's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. Fair enough, Ms. Johnson. For Lucas. That evening, Diana stood at the wrought iron gates of the Montgomery estate, staring up at the sprawling mansion. Dozens of windows glowed against the night sky, each one a reminder of a world she had never stepped into. The guard at the gate checked her name, then motioned her through without hesitation. Inside, the mansion was everything she expected. Marble floors, chandeliers dripping crystal, walls lined with art worth more than her entire apartment building. Yet it wasn't the luxury that unsettled her. It was the silence, a hollow, cavernous silence that seemed to echo even her lightest footsteps. Lucas met her in the foyer. His braces clinked softly as he shuffled forward, eyes shining with excitement. You came, he said, relief flooding his voice. I said I would, Diana replied, kneeling to his level. Now show me around before your father changes his mind. The boy giggled and led her down long hallways. They passed portraits of Montgomery ancestors, their expressions stern and unyielding. Diana felt their eyes following her, silently questioning her presence in these halls. At the end of the corridor was a wide room, Lucas's playroom. Toys sat untouched on shelves, books arranged neatly, everything too orderly, too pristine. Diana frowned. Looks like a museum, she said softly. Lucas's shoulders slumped. Dad wants it clean. I don't really use it. She walked over to a shelf, picked up a dusty chess set, and placed it on the table. Then let's use it. Things are meant to be touched, Lucas, to be lived in. The boy's eyes brightened. He struggled into a chair opposite her, fumbling with the pieces, but she let him take the lead, just as she had the night before. Moments later, Richard appeared in the doorway. He watched silently as Diana leaned back, letting Lucas triumphantly capture her knight. For the first time in years, Richard saw his son's concentration turn to delight rather than frustration. After Lucas excused himself to get water, Richard stepped into the room. You're already changing him, he said, his voice lower than usual. Diana met his gaze evenly. I'm not changing him, Mr. Montgomery. I'm letting him be himself. Richard studied her for a moment, then crossed his arms. You should understand something. This house, it eats people alive. Staff, tutors, even relatives. They come in with good intentions and leave broken. My world is not forgiving. Diana's reply was calm, resolute. Then maybe it's time someone stopped living by its rules. For a brief second, something flickered in Richard's eyes. Admiration, perhaps, or unease. He masked it quickly. You're bold, Ms. Johnson. Before Diana could respond, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Both turned sharply. Lucas's voice cried out, panicked. They rushed out to find Lucas sprawled on the floor, his braces tangled, a glass of water shattered around him. He struggled to rise, frustration twisting his face. Diana dropped beside him instantly. It's okay, Lucas. We fall so we can stand again. Her voice was steady, gentle but firm. She guided his hands, helping him untangle without ever lifting him fully, forcing him to push through the struggle. Richard bent to intervene, but she stopped him with a look. Let him do it. Lucas gritted his teeth, trembling, but managed to pull himself upright. His chest heaved, eyes glistening, not with shame, but with fierce determination. I did it, he whispered. Diana smiled. Yes, you did. Richard exhaled slowly. In all his wealth and power, he had never been able to give his son this moment. Yet this woman, who until yesterday was invisible to him, had done it with nothing more than patience and faith. Word of the restaurant incident had spread faster than Richard anticipated. By the fifth day, tabloids carried grainy photos of Diana guiding Lucas across the dining floor. Headlines shouted about the mystery waitress who defied a billionaire and captured the public's imagination. In the mansion, phones rang incessantly. Richard's public relations team warned of potential scandal. It makes you look vulnerable, one advisor muttered, sliding clippings across the desk. People are asking if the Montgomery empire is slipping. Richard waved the concern aside. Let them talk. But the unease lingered in his eyes. Meanwhile, Diana settled into her new role with quiet determination. Every afternoon, she arrived at the mansion, working with Lucas in small but meaningful ways. Together, they played clumsy piano duets, practiced slow steps across the garden path, and read aloud passages from his favorite books. Lucas laughed more in 1 week than he had in 2 years. But not everyone welcomed her presence. Thornton, the former restaurant manager now reassigned as Montgomery's house coordinator, seethed each time he saw her. He had warned Richard repeatedly that Diana was unprofessional, reckless, unsuited for the Montgomery name. One evening, as Diana packed up a stack of storybooks in the playroom, Thornton cornered her. His voice dripped with disdain. Enjoying your fairy tale, Miss Johnson? Don't think for a second this will last. Men like Richard Montgomery don't keep people like you around. Not for long. Diana closed the book firmly and turned to him. People like me? Thornton smirked. Don't play innocent. You don't belong here. This world chews up outsiders and spits them out. Better you leave before you embarrass yourself further. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Instead, she walked past him, head high. She had faced harsher words in her life than his poisonous whispers. Still, doubt crept into her thoughts as she lay awake that night. What am I doing here? What happens when the novelty wears off? Will Lucas lose me like he lost everything else? The following day, Diana arrived early. Lucas was already in the garden, struggling with his braces on the uneven stone path. She hurried toward him, but this time he shook his head. No, don't help, watch me. Step by shaky step, he crossed half the garden alone. When he stumbled, he caught himself. When he wavered, he pressed on. By the time he reached the fountain, sweat beaded his forehead, but triumph blazed in his eyes. Richard had been watching from the terrace. His chest tightened, pride and awe mixing with something else. An emotion he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. Remarkable, he murmured. But not everyone saw it that way. Later that night, Richard's board of directors convened at the estate. Over crystal glasses of whiskey, whispers grew. A waitress as companion to his son? It makes him look unstable. One man leaned closer to another. If word spreads further, investors will start to doubt his judgment. Richard overheard them but said nothing. His gaze fell on Lucas laughing in the distance. Diana beside him. He knew the storm was gathering. For the first time in years, however, he didn't feel afraid of it. The Montgomery mansion pulsed with light and music that Saturday evening. Richard had agreed, reluctantly, to host the annual charity gala, an event where New York's wealthiest paraded their influence under the guise of generosity. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos swept across the marble halls, their laughter echoing beneath chandeliers. Diana arrived discreetly, not as staff this time, but as Lucas's companion. The boy clung to her arm, his braces clicking softly against the polished floor. His eyes widened at the sight of the ballroom alive with color and sound. Don't be nervous, she whispered. You belong here as much as anyone. He nodded, though his grip on her tightened. Across the room, whispers spread like wildfire. Heads turned. The black waitress, now standing beside the heir of Montgomery wealth. To some it was scandal. To others, curiosity. Thornton, dressed in his finest suit, moved quickly to intercept them. This is highly inappropriate, he hissed at Diana, low enough for only her to hear. You're embarrassing Mr. Montgomery in front of his peers. Before Diana could answer, Richard approached. His presence silenced nearby conversations. "She is here at my invitation," he said flatly, eyes boring into Thornton. "And if anyone has a problem with that, they can leave." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few donors exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to move. The evening progressed with speeches and toasts. Yet beneath the glitter, tension simmered. When Diana guided Lucas to the dance floor during the orchestra's soft waltz, a circle of stares closed in around them. Some whispered, others smirked. Then it happened. A woman in a jeweled gown, her pearls gleaming under the lights, leaned toward her table mates and said loudly enough for the music to dip around her words, "Look at that. A Montgomery heir reduced to dancing with staff." Laughter tittered around her. Lucas froze, his hand trembling in Diana's grasp. The shame in his eyes cut deeper than any insult. Diana bent low, whispering fiercely, "Don't you dare stop now. Their words don't matter. Yours do." Lucas swallowed, then took another step. The braces screeched, his foot dragged, but he led. He led her across the ballroom, through the sea of whispers, until the music swelled and the laughter died. From the edge of the floor, Richard watched, his jaw clenched, every muscle taut. He raised his glass high, voice carrying across the hall. "To my son, who tonight reminded us all what courage looks like." The orchestra paused, then struck louder. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then building, drowning out the last of the mocking whispers. Diana's throat tightened, pride flooding through her. Lucas's smile returned, fragile but defiant. For the first time, the ballroom felt less like a cage and more like a stage. Yet in the shadows near the bar, Thornton seethed. He leaned close to a cluster of board members. "This woman is dangerous," he muttered. "If Richard won't see it, we'll make him." The storm Diana feared was no longer approaching. It had already begun. The morning after the gala, headlines splashed across glossy magazines and financial dailies. Montgomery heir dances with Waitress. Gala crowd stunned. Billionaire defies convention. Who is Diana Johnson? Some articles romanticized the scene, calling it a rare display of vulnerability among the elite. Others were merciless, painting Diana as an opportunist climbing on Lucas's misfortune. At the breakfast table, Richard scanned the papers silently while Lucas munched his cereal, oblivious to the storm brewing. Diana sat at the far end, uneasy under the weight of flashing cameras she'd noticed even as they left the ballroom. "Don't read that," Richard said at last, pushing the stack of papers aside. "They'll say anything to sell." But she had already caught one line. "Does Richard Montgomery's heart overrule his judgment?" The words stung more than she expected. Later that afternoon, she found herself summoned to the library. A half dozen of Montgomery Holdings board members stood waiting, Thornton among them, smug satisfaction painted across his face. One director, a silver-haired man with a voice like steel, spoke first. "Ms. Johnson, we respect what you've done for young Lucas. But you must understand, Richard's image is not personal. It's corporate. Investors are uneasy. Questions are being asked." Thornton stepped forward, his tone oily. "Your presence here threatens more than reputations. It threatens livelihoods. Tens of thousands depend on Montgomery Holdings. Surely you wouldn't endanger that for your experiment." Diana felt the weight of their eyes, the unspoken accusations. She straightened her back. "I'm not here for your company or your empire. I'm here for Lucas. He deserves someone who believes in him, not in appearances." A sharp laugh broke from one woman. "Noble words, but do you think belief balances ledgers?" Before Diana could respond, the door opened. Richard entered, eyes sweeping the room like a storm. "Enough!" He moved to stand beside Diana, his presence towering. "If anyone here questions her role in my son's life, they question mine as his father." Richard Warner, the silver-haired director, warned, "Sentiment has no place in leadership. The market reacts to perception, not truth." Richard's gaze hardened. "Then let the market react. My son's dignity is not for sale." For a moment, the room was silent. Thornton's jaw tightened, fury flashing in his eyes. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared press further in Richard's presence. After they dispersed, Diana turned to him. "You didn't have to do that. You put yourself at risk." Richard shook his head. "No, Ms. Johnson. I've lived too long protecting an empire and too little protecting my son. Last night, he showed more courage than any of us. If the world can't see that, then the world can burn." Diana swallowed hard, moved by his conviction. Yet in the pit of her stomach, unease lingered. Thornton wasn't finished. His eyes had promised as much. And for the first time, she feared not for herself, but for what his schemes might do to Lucas. The storm broke on a Tuesday morning. Diana woke to the vibration of her phone, screen flooded with notifications. Headlines screamed from every corner of the internet. Who is Diana Johnson? Secrets of the Waitress turned heir's companion. From Harlem apartment to billionaire mansion. What is she after? Paparazzi photos of her modest apartment, her brother Samuel in his wheelchair. Even her mother's old address were plastered online. Words like gold digger and schemer danced across comment sections. Her hands trembled. This wasn't an accident. Someone had fed the press. She thought instantly of Thornton. By the time she arrived at the mansion, cameras lined the gate. Flashes burst as she slipped inside, heart pounding. Lucas greeted her at the door, but his usual smile faltered when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. Diana forced a smile. "Nothing that matters more than you." But inside she wondered if that was true. In the study, Richard slammed the morning paper onto his desk. "They went after her family. That's a line even my enemies rarely cross." Diana stood opposite, refusing to let her voice shake. "It's Thornton. He warned me this house chews people alive. He's proving his point." Richard's fist clenched. "I'll handle him." "No," Diana said firmly. "This isn't about silencing one man. It's about proving them wrong. If I hide, they win. If I stand by Lucas, they lose." For a long moment, Richard studied her, searching for cracks. He found none. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Then we stand together." That evening, Richard did something no one expected. He invited the press into his mansion, not for a defensive statement, but for a showcase. Cameras flashed as Lucas, braces strapped tight, walked into the grand hall with Diana at his side. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard said, his voice commanding, "you've all asked who Diana Johnson is. Let me answer. She is the woman who gave my son back his courage." Gasps echoed as Lucas, trembling but determined, stepped forward. He reached for Diana's hand and raised his chin. "She believed in me when no one else did. That's all you need to know." A hush swept through the room, heavier than any headline. The boy's voice cracked, but it was real. The cameras didn't just capture his braces, they captured his pride. Richard looked out at the flashing bulbs. "So write what you will, but understand this. Money can build towers, power can move markets, yet neither gave my son his first steps back. She did, and I will not apologize for it." The reporters erupted in questions, but the story had already written itself. Later that night, Lucas scrolled through a stream of live comments online. "Dad, look. People are saying I'm brave. They're saying Diana's a hero." Richard allowed himself a rare smile. "Sometimes the world gets it right." Diana felt her throat tighten, tears threatening. She looked into the camera still lingering on the edge of the room and spoke quietly, almost to herself but loud enough to be heard. "If you believe every child deserves someone who stands by them, like this video, subscribe and share our story. Let's remind the world what courage looks like." The cameraman didn't cut. The line traveled instantly across feeds, echoed by thousands who clicked, shared, and commented. And somewhere in the shadows of the estate, Thornton watched the broadcast with rage burning in his chest. His attack had backfired, but he wasn't done, not yet. Thornton's downfall began with a whisper, but his last move roared like a storm. 3 nights after the press conference, Richard's private line buzzed with a message that cut colder than winter. Montgomery Foundation funds misused. Connection to Diana Johnson. Attached were forged documents suggesting that charity money had flowed directly into Diana's account. Within hours, major outlets picked up the leak. Anchors frowned gravely as they repeated her name, now tied to corruption. Investors called emergency meetings. The Montgomery stock dipped before noon. In the mansion, Diana sat in the library, phone buzzing with accusations. "They think I stole from children's hospitals," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I've never touched a dollar." Richard slammed his hand against the desk. "I know, this is Thornton. He's desperate." But knowing and proving were two different things. The board convened again, this time with fury. One member waved the forged papers. "This is unacceptable. Richard, your personal choices are now bleeding into the company. If you don't sever ties with Ms. Johnson, we'll be forced to consider your removal as chairman." The room buzzed with agreement. Thornton, standing smugly at the back, folded his arms. Diana's chest tightened. She rose, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Then let me go. Fire me, distance yourself, save your empire. I never asked to be here. Lucas gasped. No! You can't leave! His braces clinked as he rushed forward, eyes wide with panic. She didn't do anything. She saved me. You all don't care about truth. You just care about power. Silence dropped like a hammer. The board shifted uncomfortably under the boy's raw cry. Even Thornton faltered for a moment. Richard placed both hands on his son's shoulders. Lucas is right. Power without truth is rot, and I will not rot for your comfort. His gaze swept the room like fire. If you want my chair, take it. But understand this. I will not trade my son's faith or Ms. Johnson's integrity for your approval. The room erupted in arguments, but Richard's voice thundered above them. Enough! The truth will clear her name, and when it does, I expect every one of you to remember this day. That night, Diana sat alone in the garden, staring at the reflection of moonlight on the fountain. Lucas limped out, dragging his braces, and sat beside her. They'll never believe me, she said quietly. Lucas shook his head fiercely. They don't have to. I believe you. Dad believes you. That's enough. For a child, his conviction was startling. Diana blinked back tears. Thank you, Lucas. Behind them, Richard's voice cut through the night. And soon the world will believe too. Thornton made one mistake. He left a trail. Diana turned. What do you mean? Richard's eyes were cold steel. I have investigators tracing every scent. By dawn, the truth will surface. Thornton thought he could bury you. He's about to bury himself. Diana exhaled, half relief, half dread. Tomorrow would decide everything. Dawn broke over Manhattan, pale light spilling across the Montgomery Tower. Inside the boardroom, tension coiled like a snake. Reporters clustered outside the building, hungry for blood. Diana's or Richard's? Richard entered with Diana and Lucas at his side. The board sat waiting, papers stacked, faces grim. Thornton leaned casually against the window, smug confidence radiating from every gesture. Shall we begin? The silver-haired director asked. Mr. Montgomery, unless you can prove otherwise, we must assume these funds were misappropriated with Ms. Johnson's involvement. Richard set a thick folder on the table. Then let's prove otherwise. An investigator stepped forward, distributing documents. One by one, the board members scanned them. Bank transfers traced back, not to Diana's modest account, but to a shell corporation under Thornton's control. Dates, signatures, forged approvals, all tied neatly together. Thornton's smirk faltered. This is a fabrication. Enough, Richard barked. You staged this to destroy her. You exploited my son's trust, my company's name, and this family's pain. But you left fingerprints on every step. Did you really think your greed was invisible? Gasps filled the room. Diana's chest tightened as the truth unfolded. Wave after wave washing away the venom of the past week. Lucas squeezed her hand under the table, whispering, Told you. Thornton sputtered, but security already moved in. The board did not protest. Silence carried his downfall as he was escorted out, his empire of whispers collapsing behind him. When the door shut, Richard faced the board. You wanted proof. Now you have it. And let me be clear, Diana Johnson's name will not be dragged again. She stays, not because of sentiment, but because she has shown more integrity than half this room combined. For once, no one argued. Later that evening, the mansion felt different, lighter, freer. The silence that once haunted its halls was replaced with Lucas's laughter echoing from the garden. Diana stood by the fountain, watching him take cautious, proud steps on the stone path. He stumbled, recovered, then raised his arms in triumph. Richard joined her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. He wouldn't be here without you. She shook her head. He did this himself. I just believed. Richard looked at her, eyes steady. Sometimes belief is the rarest gift. For the first time in years, Diana allowed herself to smile fully. Not the polite smile of a waitress, not the guarded smile of survival, but the unshaken smile of a woman who had stood against power, endured the storm, and remained herself. Lucas turned, calling out, Diana, look! I can walk the whole way now! Her heart swelled. I'm watching, Lucas, always. The boy's laughter rose against the twilight, carrying further than any headline, louder than any scandal. And for Richard Montgomery, the billionaire who once measured everything in profit, that sound was priceless.